being passed around. Ask that you sign for your attendance. And if you're visiting with us, welcome again. We'd like you to stay after fellowship time in the north room, have a few refreshments. I'd like to call your attention to a few of the announcements. You can kind of read it for yourself. Next Sunday, the 27th, we're going to have the Lee Roast at Victory Park after church. Read about that. And Sensibility Auction is also next Sunday. It's not in the bulletin, but the Parts is having their sale on November 1st and 2nd, so Friday and Saturday. It's on the board in the narthex. Some information about it. Are there any other announcements? Yes. Sue.
I just wanted to let everybody know, if you're coming to the park for the mini roast and the s'mores, you can see me after church again. We've got hot dog prongs to cook them. And we also need people to volunteer to bring wood for the fireplace at the shelter house.
Thank you. Yes.
The stewardship little booklet went out in the mail, and that post office had a difficult time with them in some cases because the paper was so thin, and then if yours got eaten up or you didn't get one, there'll be extras out in the narthex. And I think most of them made it maybe a little wrinkled, but if it was unreadable, definitely pick another one up.
Ours was a little tore up. Yes.
It's the hours, I believe it's Tuesday, and it says here Wednesday.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's a little confusing.
Yes. Whatever the calendar says, I don't have any. Anybody else? All right, let's prepare our hearts and minds for worship. Good Lord be with you. And also with you.
I greet you in the name of Christ and welcome you to worship this morning. We're glad that you're here with us. There's a lot going on in the life of our church and in our community this time of year. A couple of the hymns this morning, the first hymn and the last hymn, may not be real familiar to you, but bear with it. And because they're hymns that everyone should learn. And if you learn those, then we'll be singing them at other times throughout the week. Please join me in our call to worship. I lift up my eyes to the hills, from where will my help come? My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. Let us worship God. came into the world to save sinners. He himself bore our sins in his body on the cross, so that free from sin, we might live for righteousness. Trusting in that gracious promise, let us confess our sin as together we say, God have mercy and grace. We are meant to praise you and give thanks to you always. We confess that we do not live out of constant gratitude. We harbor resentment for what we lack. We blame you. We blame others. We doubt your compassion, even your power. We find it hard to give ourselves away to you or to others in generous expressions of gratitude and praise. Forgive us, we pray, for attitudes and behaviors that diminish us joyful thanksgiving. Heal and restore us so that we may return to you with the right spirit. Help us to live holy and joyful lives, befitting the people we love and save. The scriptures are given to correct our ways, to train us in righteousness, and to equip us for every good work. Friends, believe the good news. In the presence of God and of Christ Jesus, who is the only judge of the living and the dead, we give thanks for the gift of forgiveness. By the grace of Christ, we will be persistent in the life of faith to which we are called. Amen. As reconciled people of God, it is good to celebrate, so I invite anyone to celebration to share. Come forward this morning.
No? No? What do you think? So the rest of you think? Maybe not like a gift, but do you think that maybe he appreciates it? And maybe he would give us more, not gonna worth it. Let us have a happier life, maybe? Yeah? Because he knows that we understand that it's important to praise him. What do you think? You don't know? Is it kind of like when we go see Santa Claus in the shopping mall and we like sit on his lap and hey Santa, this is what I want for Christmas. Is that how we should treat praying God? No? Well, why not? It's not only on Christmas. Yeah. And it's not only when we just want something, right? We shouldn't pray to God just because we want something. Right? Do you agree? You're looking at me. You don't agree. You don't know, do you? No? Are you sure? Okay. So we pray to God every day, right? You know, we pray to him to thank him and to praise him and not just ask stuff of him, right? Yeah. Okay. Let's say a prayer to God. Dear God, thank you for giving us the opportunity to praise you every day. Help us to understand that we need to come to you and every day, not just when we think we need your help. Amen.
God has given us peace through Jesus Christ. Let us share signs of Christ's peace with one another. The peace of Christ be with you. And also with you.
life-altering, world-changing, blessing-filled world. Through Jesus Christ we pray. Amen. Today we're reading Genesis chapter 32, verses 22 to 31 in the Old Testament on page 30 of your reading Bibles. The same night he got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of Jabbok. He took them then and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. Jacob was left alone, and the man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans, and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "What is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved." The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. This is the word of the Lord.
The second reading this morning is from the 18th chapter of Luke's Gospel, beginning at the first verse. Then Jesus told them a parable about the need to pray always and not to lose heart. He said, "In a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor had respect for people. In that city there was a widow who kept coming to him and saying, 'Grant me justice against my opponent.' For a while he refused, but later he said to himself, 'Though I have no fear of God and no respect for anyone, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will grant her justice, so that she may not wear me out by continually coming.' And the Lord said, 'Listen to what the unjust judge says, and will not God grant justice to his chosen ones who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long in helping them? I tell you, he will quickly grant justice to them. And yet, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth?'" This is the word of the Lord. The title of my sermon, the Stewardship of the Future, is not original to me. I unabashedly stole it from Presbyterian pastor Bob Cumming. And while it is tempting to draw parallels between what's been going on in Washington, D.C. recently with the parable of the unjust judge, I'll leave that for you to draw your own connections about it. It is the question with which Jesus concludes that parable, the question about whether he will find faith upon his return. That question is what I was haunted by this week. But I don't think the question makes sense apart from the parable, so let's begin with that. Luke tells us right up front what the parable is about. It's a story about persistence in prayer and God's compassion and responsiveness. It is, and yet it isn't. There is a judge, says Jesus, and we know about judges in Israel. We know their role was to maintain a reasonable harmony in the community and to adjudicate disputes fairly and impartially. It is particularly worth remembering that Jewish law, the Torah, described a particular responsibility for such judges when it came to protecting the rights of the poor, of widows and orphans and the stranger, sojourners in the land. And Jesus says, there is a widow. And now we have a plot. And the choice of the character automatically raises the stakes for the judge, because any God-fearing jurist would feel obliged by the Torah to take especially good care of her. The problem is that this judge is not God-fearing and not especially interested in justice at all. And so he tries to ignore the woman's plea. But the widow is not going to take no for an answer. She keeps coming to him day after day, resolutely pressing her case, until the judge finally has a conversation with himself. And the judge figures that if he doesn't grant the widow's petition, she will wear him out and may even give him a black eye, either figuratively or literally. In either case, he would come off looking like a fool. So, despite his callousness and lack of integrity, he acts out of self-interest and gives the woman what she wants. Then Jesus says, if a wicked judge will finally relent and hear the woman's case, how much more will God? And the point is that God is full of compassion, willing and ready to hear the prayers of the poor and the oppressed. And the counsel is to be persistent in prayer, knowing that God will answer the prayers of God's children. It's a straightforward parable with a neat conclusion. And it is surely good news for those who pray day and night for justice, for it promises that their prayers do not go unanswered. The problem is, of course, that the chosen people of God had been crying out for justice for 2,000 years before Jesus. They cried out when they were enslaved in Egypt. They cried out when they were in exile in Babylon. And in Jesus' day, God's chosen people were still crying out under Roman occupation. And 2,000 years later, the poor and the oppressed are still calling out for relief. And for the most part, don't seem to be anywhere near closer to the realm of justice and compassion than they were when Jesus told this parable. We ministers know, particularly, perhaps more clearly and poignantly than anyone else, that prayers are not always answered, if by answering we mean the fulfillment of the specific request of the one praying. Ministers know firsthand the powerlessness standing by the bedside of a critically ill patient whom family members are praying for healing, hoping the minister will pray for a healing miracle, and knowing that healing is, in all probability, not going to occur, not going to happen. Ministers know the question, does prayer really work, is laden with emotion, that its answer must be anything but simple. Don't get me wrong, I believe persistent prayer is very important, even when such prayers are not answered in the ways that we think best. It's important to be unrelenting in our prayers, not only because of the changes our prayers may elicit in God's mind, but for the changes such prayer can work in our own hearts and minds. You see, I don't believe Jesus told this parable to resolve the mystery of answered and unanswered prayers. And while it is also about justice and compassion, it is, in my opinion, a parable about persistence. The kind of persistence and tenacity of Jacob wrestling with man until daybreak, from our Genesis reading this morning. Kathleen O'Connor says that Jacob's calling is the calling of believers to meet God, to struggle with God, to seek God's face in the anguishes of the night and the struggles of the day. And it may be that living a life of faith is Just as Jacob's wrestling all night long, so too the widow's persistence in the face of the unjust judge presents a dramatic example of unflinching faith against impossible odds. I don't think Jesus is advising his followers to make a nuisance of themselves, but rather to trust in the abiding goodness and mercy of God active in their lives. The persistence of God is not an issue here. God keeps covenants and promises. But the persistence of our prayers and the doggedness of our efforts to bring this world into alignment with God's intentions are yet important. This faith we claim is a fragile thing. The faith of the church is never more than a generation away from extinction. For faith to live and thrive, it must be passed on to our children. Jesus' haunting question, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? Is in essence a question about our stewardship of the future. The choices we make today will have a significant impact on the shape of our children's and grandchildren's future. And nowhere more than in matters of legacy and faith. So today, just for a moment, I want to focus on the legacy that will be bequeathed to future generations. I want to ask you to consider the Reformed faith around which we gather here at Prince of Peace, and what we are doing to pass that faith on to our children. The mission study team has been struggling to answer the questions of who we are as a church and what God is calling us to be in the future. And at our meeting this past week, we talked about the story from Genesis of Jacob wrestling with man. And each of us shared how that story informs and speaks to what we as a team have been doing.